minimally such and such years. So he was older than 16. So I can't remember the math, but from the time he was born, he looked like 16, but from the time he was born to the time he spoke Srimad Bhagavatam, a lot of time passed, because in the middle is he was present to hear Bhismadeva speaking words to Maharaj Yudhisthira. And how long after Bhismadeva parted did Yudhisthira rule? 34 years. Huh?
At least as old as Maharaja Parikshit.
At least what?
As old as Maharaja Parikshit.
Yeah, at least. But Maharaj Yudhisthira ruled after he being installed as the king until the time that Krishna departed. The calculation, my memory says, it was around 34 years. And Krishna departed. The Pandavas departed. Parikshit became king. Parikshit ruled for some time. And then Shukadeva Goswami spoke Srimad Bhagavatam. He wasn't just 16. That's a detail. But we say 16 because he looks 16. Okay. Text 9. Bhismadeva, who was the best amongst the 8 Vasus, received and overwhelmed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and place. I'll read this purport. Expert religionists know perfectly how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas or religious preachers or reformers of the world executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world, and if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of time and place. Bhismadeva was one of the 12 great authorities in preaching this cult of devotional service, and therefore he could receive and welcome all powerful sages assembled there at his deathbed from all parts of the universe. He was certainly unable at that time to welcome and receive them physically because he was neither at his home nor in a normal healthy condition, but he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind, and therefore he could utter sweet words with hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind, and by words, and he knew well how to utilize them in the proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. Now, is the sound difficulty straightened out?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay. So the 8 Vasus, a quick because it's very involved. The 8 Vasus. All 8 Vasus were to descend on earth, and the 7 brothers of Bhismadeva were killed shortly after they were born. Some offense, so they were cursed to come. And who are the Vasus anyways? Vasus, not a lot said about the Vasus, but Vasus they exist in the heavenly realm, and they're warrior-like. They're powerful warriors, Vasus. And they're deployed in different ways at different times by the demigods as warrior skill is needed. So they made some offense. They were cursed to take birth, and particularly the one who became Bhismadeva was cursed to stay on earth for some time. So when Santanu became attracted to Ganga, who was also cursed to take her birth on earth in a female form. So Santanu became attracted to Ganga. He made a proposal that we should marry, and she agreed on a condition that he never says no. And what husband has to be in a position like that? But never say no. He agreed. 7 children. Shortly after they were born, she killed them, and he was not supposed to say no. But when the 8th child was born, he said no. And she said, "That's it. I'm out of here." She left and took that 8th child with her. Deva Vrata was entrusted to Parshuram to train him in military skill. So Parshuram in this way became the guru of Bhismadeva, specific to military arts, and that later became a very important issue. But he received scriptural training from one of the sages, Vashishta perhaps, I can't remember. And after some time, Ganga returned to Santanu and said, "Here's your son." And then she departed. So here's Santanu with one of the 8 Vasus, who is now his son, with Ganga as his mother and Santanu as his father, and scriptural training as well as military training from the most exalted persons. So Santanu accepted him as his son. He became the firstborn son, and thus the rightful heir to the throne. And we know the story, it's not here, but he took a vow that he wouldn't marry and wouldn't become king, so that his father Santanu could marry Satyavati. Another story. Text 10. Lord Sri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhismadeva, and since Bhismadeva knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. The sons of Maharaj Pandu were sitting silently nearby, overtaken with affection for their dying grandfather, because their grandfather raised them as his own children when Pandu died. Left them fatherless, and they were just young boys, brothers. So Bhismadeva accepted the role like a father, and so he was grandfather Bhishma, and naturally very affectionate to the Pandavas, and naturally the Pandavas very affectionate to him. So seeing him in this bed of arrows, dying condition, they were overtaken with affection. Seeing this, so now what's the Vaishnava etiquette for a grandfather in this situation? What's he going to do? Bhishmadeva congratulated them with feeling. There were tears of ecstasy in his eyes, for he was overwhelmed by love and affection. I mean, he's transcending his pain by the loving sentiments of ecstatic love for the Pandavas, the dear associates of Krishna. At the last stage of life, when Bhishmadeva saw his most exalted grandsons, headed by Maharaj Yudhisthira, sitting very gently at his side, the great warrior grandfather could not check his loving tears, which were automatically flowing from his eyes. He remembered the great tribulations suffered by his most pious grandsons. Certainly, he was the most satisfied man because of Yudhisthira's being enthroned in place of Duryodhana. And thus he began to congratulate them. So here's the first of Bhishma's words. The scene is clear. They're grief-stricken, seeing their beloved grandfather in this condition. He's not worried about his condition, he's worried about theirs. Bhishmadeva said, "Oh, what terrible sufferings and what terrible injustices you good souls suffer for being the sons of religion personified." This Yudhisthira was the son of Yamaraj, Dharmaraj. You did not deserve to remain alive under those tribulations, yet you're protected by the Brahmanas, God, and religion. Very important verse. Purport. Maharaj Yudhisthira was disturbed to see the great massacre in the battle of Kurukshetra. Bhishmadeva could understand this, and therefore he spoke first of the terrible sufferings of Maharaj Yudhisthira. He was put into difficulty by injustice only, and the battle of Kurukshetra was fought just to counteract this injustice. Therefore, he should not regret the great massacre. He wanted to point out, particularly, that they were always protected by the Brahmanas, the Lord, and religious principles. As long as they were protected by these three important items, there was no cause of disappointment. Thus, Bhishmadeva encouraged Maharaj Yudhisthira to dissipate his despondency. As long as a person is fully in cooperation with the wishes of the Lord, guided by the bona fide Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and strictly following the religious principles, one has no cause for despondency, however trying the circumstance of life. Bhishmadeva, as one of the authorities in the line, wanted to impress this point upon the Pandavas. And of course, us also. Lesson. First lesson. Of course, it's to the Pandavas, but it's also to us. Life has its tribulations. During the previous weekend, a group of us were in Gita Nagari with, it was a really nice experience, 100 people who saw something on Facebook called Body, Mind, Spirit, and at a farm, and they paid something, $170 per person, to attend. 100 such people. And there might have been some discount for some people that couldn't afford or something like that. But so new people, and the topic was the art of meditation, overcoming negative emotion. So negative emotion can come for all kinds of reasons, but a common reason is some misfortune comes. Unexpected, or even expected, but misfortune comes. I mean, expected means like if somebody close to you dies, and you're some relative, an old person dies. That's negative emotion connected to that loss. Here, Bhismadeva isn't dead, but he's suffering, and surely he's going to perish. And the Pandavas are feeling this negative emotion or misfortune is befallen them. Their beloved grandfather is departing. So we spent some time discussing what to do about negative emotions and how to overcome negative emotions, but here's a transcendental lesson, or at least a dharmic lesson, which we didn't include in our weekend, but it's very nice. Supposing we are going through a situation where there's some misfortune, some tribulation that arises because of some misfortune, and it's hard to bear that emotion. So the advice given here, it's 3 times in the purport and once in the verse, so it's really drilled. We can step back and consider what Bhismadeva is saying is have the actions that I have done that preceded this misfortune, were those actions that I did according to dharma, with the principles of religion? And if you check that box and the answer is yes, then the next question is, were those activities executed under the guidance of qualified persons, Vaishnavas and Brahmanas in Vedic culture? And if you did those dharmic activities under the guidance of qualified Vaishnavas and Brahmanas, then you can go to the next box and say, when I was doing those things that were according to dharma, under the guidance of qualified Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, was my purpose to satisfy the Supreme Lord? Or was there some other purpose? And if in the case of Yudhisthira, all boxes are checked. In other words, there's alignment in Yudhisthira's life with all 3. Prior to the battle, he was not prepared. He was ready to let go and let him take the kingdom. Same as Yudhisthira, same as Arjuna, but Yudhisthira, same. But it was advised specifically by Krishna that it should be done. And dharmic reasons why it should be done, there's plenty. A duty of a king for those who have done XYZ things is it's best for them that there's death penalty if it's very, very extreme. And in the case of the Kauravas, very, very extreme. Very, very extreme. Without listing multiple atrocious activities. And so it was the dharmic thing to do, to not just look the other way and say, go ahead, do it, keep doing it, perform these punishable activities, and I'll do nothing. It's the duties of the king, not necessarily everyday citizens, but duties of the kingly status or kingly order to engage with these other persons in a way that they're duly punished. Was it under the guidance of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas? Certainly under the guidance of Brahmanas, and even more specifically under the guidance of Krishna himself. And finally, was the purpose of Yudhisthira to please Krishna? Although he had wanted something else, Krishna wanted this, so it's then for the pleasure of Krishna and not otherwise. So that's Maharaj Yudhisthira. And same, principles apply to us. It's Bhaktisiddhanta's lesson that when some misfortune comes, we look inwardly, rather than looking outwardly, pointing fingers and blaming others for our misfortune. But rather look inwardly, and is there something within that needs to be realigned? So if any one of those three or combination was not done properly, and here comes some misfortune, we go to correcting ourselves within, not blaming or finger pointing or fault finding others for the being instruments for our misfortune. They're simply instruments, and their misfortune comes from not having these three in proper order and living our lives. So we're responsible. Even if we're sincere and trying, etc., we're still responsible for mistakes in these three categories. And in Yudhisthira's case, it was all three boxes are checked. And so when that's the case, then there's no cause of lamentation. Even the misfortune is there, and it's very painful. So the misfortune was not just seeing Grandfather Bhishma lying on the battlefield, about to die. It was also having taken stock of the massive numbers of persons who were killed during the course of a major, major battle. There's all these dead people and their funerals and all the things that Arjuna said were reasons that would be problematic. So he's thinking, all of this for me, so I can become king? What a wretch. What a horrible person. And he was feeling very badly, sad, guilty of doing very wrong things and causing suffering for so many people, even suffering for the survivors. That was his nature, very humble. So the starting point of the discussion was you had to undergo so much tribulation, and that you even survived it is amazing. So you've been under the protection of the personality of Godhead. That means even when it's undergoing tribulation, if the focus of one's life is abiding by codes of dharma, acting under the guidance of qualified brahmanas and Vaishnavas, and dedicating those activities to the personality of Godhead, and here comes some misfortune, well, we can be comforted that the Supreme Lord permitted all of that, and for some purpose, for our more deeply taking shelter, for example, or correcting our mistakes, holding us responsible and relieving us in a swift manner for what could be, lifetimes worth of discomfort or tribulation. It's purification and lesson learning time. At least the lesson of being introspective and trying to improve. There's always room to improve in these three areas. Following principles of codes of dharma. In doing so, executing those things under the guidance of qualified persons. And dedicating those activities and the purpose behind the activities to pleasing Krishna. That's our life. That's a nice lesson just from one initial prayer. So I'm going to end and see if there's some discussion. They were controlled by the Brahmanas. So he just said, stop. No more sacrifices, take a hike. You're not needed in my kingdom. So supposing that's extreme, that don't follow Dharma principles, but supposing one is interested in following Dharma principles, there are people in this world that want to do righteous activity, but not under the guidance of qualified persons. So, and then when doing those things, that the consciousness behind is ultimately service to the personality of Godhead. He should be pleased. That's the bhakti principle. Anukulyena Krishnanushilanam. That's the bhakti principle. So those are the three things. Acting rightly, according to the codes of Dharma, submitting oneself to the guidance of elevated Brahmanas and Vaishnavas, willingly, doing course correction if there's some indication from them. And then the purpose. Is that okay? More?
So Maharaj, in this case, was it suggested that Bhismadeva should have taken the consultation of Brahmanas before taking any vows?
Oh, that's a trick question. Mean that the vow that he said that I won't marry, I won't become king?
Yeah, because
Should he have consulted Brahmanas before that?
yeah,
That's
because,
your question?
Yes, yes, Maharaj.
That's a trick question. Well, we may not, it's not exactly a trick question. Supposing circumstance of life is such that you don't have a qualified Brahmana or Vaishnava by your left shoulder or right shoulder, then you have to consider, yad yad acharati shreshtas, what have great souls done in circumstances. And that's life. And so we don't know what precedent from great souls, acharya-like personalities, placed the contentment of one's father above one's own contentment. But certainly Ramchandra is one example. So, in principle, he acted under guidance because of precedent. Now, so what procedures were followed? It doesn't say, at least in this our present Srimad Bhagavatam. But that's how that principle can be observed in Bhismadeva's case and as well as in our case. So that corollary question is, what should we do as we're living our life and there isn't somebody right by our side to consult, to take, the consent from them? If circumstance permits, we seek blessings. And if circumstance is such that they're not by our side and some decisions need to be made in a timely fashion, then you do those other considerations. Is there some precedent? And how close is this decision to that precedent? How's that?
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, I was wondering, is Yamaraj the personification of dharma, or is there like a separate personification for religiousness?
Well, sometimes Yudhishthira is considered the personification of dharma because he's the son of Yamaraj, but he's the personification. He's so knowledgeable in the codes of dharma that he is often called Dharmaraj, the king of. Now your question is, are there other entities or, features of Dharmaraj besides Yudhishthira, besides Yamaraj? That's your question. Well, the son of Yamaraj and others that abide by. So nothing comes to mind at the moment. Are others besides these two given the title of Dharmaraj? Probably. Nothing comes to mind, the names of those persons. So it's a principle. So in principle of the king of Dharma is having received it from a proper source and living strictly. And even in difficult situations, living strictly according to principles of Dharma.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. This is the question regarding tribulation. If someone,
Regarding what?
tribulation.
Tribulation.
If someone is going through tribulation and possibly that he is, if it is the tribulation is not due to in this lifetime, if they would have done something in the previous life,
Okay.
that's the cause for this tribulation, and there is no course of action cannot be taken on that because we don't know, because they didn't know anything that they did in this life. And then other than taking a deep shelter of Krishna, what is our response?
What are options of someone to deal with tribulations that come from previous life's misdeeds?
Right.
Well, there's short-term and not as substantial. You know, atonements of various kinds. Accepting, under guidance, accepting some kind of vrata, some kind of purification experience. I was thinking about this morning. The piety of people born in India is very significant. I was thinking specifically about I was requested to stay for another day because May 3rd is Akshaya Tritiya. And Akshaya Tritiya means something to people in various parts of India, certainly Simachalam, but other places and other places and other places, because it's an auspicious day. Now, people outside of India don't even know it's Akshaya Tritiya. They don't do auspicious things on Akshaya Tritiya. And how is it that people in India have access to these things? They know about these things and they do these things again and 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 again. Just like last night, I was distributing cookies, and there's one person who was like really keen on, he wanted some of that Mahaprasadam from Radha Govinda. I tried to give him a second cookie. He says, okay, but I want some of that Mahaprasadam. So, you know, that's an answer to your question. It's not exactly taking deep shelter of the personality of God. It is accepting mercy in auspicious days or in auspicious ways, and accumulating and accumulating. If there's something in the past, the power of these auspicious things has the power to counteract misfortune or misdeeds from the past. And again and again and again. To those who live their lives that way, it doesn't mean they don't have tribulation in their lives, but it means what tribulation comes is of a different quality, has a different purpose to it altogether. Okay?
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Maybe this is a follow-up to the
Sure.
similar question. So, Maharaj, you mentioned 3 check boxes, right? Where did you follow dharmic principles, and were you guided by the Brahmanas or Vaishnavas, and was your action to please the Supreme Lord? So what if all the 3 check boxes are not checked, right? Like, so you know you did some misdeeds, not guided by Brahmanas or Vaishnavas, definitely not to please the Supreme Lord.
Therefore,
And as a result,
what was the correction mechanism is your question?
right, like, so you do undergo tribulations, which you can, which you know you're bound to get.
Yes. So now you have knowledge of where it came from. Now what do you do?
Yeah.
That's your question.
Yes.
Tighten some screws going forward in time. Be more diligent in 1 or 2 or 3 going forward in time. That's not exactly an atonement, it's very similar to the message that's there in Nectar Devotion or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. If there's a slip and there's a fall, what to do? Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu says there's no need for atonement. There's need for reinstating oneself in bhakti. So in reinstating oneself in bhakti in those three ways, and it's continual refinement and realignment in the ways of bhakti. And in between, it's exactly what Lord Brahma says in his prayers. You just accept this misfortune is coming, rather than being immersed in trying to adjust or minimize the misfortune. Accept. I mean, one may make some adjustments, like supposing there's a medical problem. We're not, what do they call themselves? Christian scientists. We just suffer, and just because that's God's arrangement for you, so you just suffer. We see doctors. But that misfortune that's come because of whatever the misdeeds, the shortcomings of those three categories, you do needful things, but you tighten the screws on each of those three areas, become reinstated properly in bhakti. Okay. Anything? Anything online? No? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.